All right, and now for the second half of Authors and Works Tossups, Cather through William Somerset Maugham. This will now be numbers 27 through 52. Tossup number 27. He wrote about Sam, who works as a newsboy in Chicago after leaving his home in Iowa, and John Stockton changes his name to Bruce Dudley in a novel the Hemingway parodied in The Torrents of Spring, Dark Laughter. The author of Wendy McPherson's Son, he wrote about a berry-picking former teacher named Wing Biddlebaum in one work. In that work, Kate Swift is admired by the Reverend Curtis Hartman, and the residents of a town are all observed by the reporter George Willard. For 10 points, name this author of Winesburg, Ohio. And that is Sherwood Anderson. Toss-up number 28. A key conversation in this novel takes place over a meal of sirloin and asparagus while two men watch the play Under the Gaslight in another scene, not knowing that they love the same actress. One of those men, fancy traveling salesman, provides the title character a lavish lifestyle unlike her hometown of Columbia City. In a new city without Charles Drouet, that protagonist's career improves greatly while her husband, George Hurstwood, descends into poverty and gambling before committing suicide in a flop house. For 10 points, name this controversial novel about a rural Midwestern girl in an urban setting named Caroline Meeber, the debut novel of Theodore Dreiser. And that is Sister Carrie. Sister Carrie. Toss-up number 29. After visiting a convent school, this author wrote a poem ending with the question, how can we know the dancer from the dance? In another poem by this author, the broken wall, the burning roof and tower, and Agamemnon dead is engendered by the aftermath of a sudden blow. One of this author's poem asks sages standing in God's holy fire to gather me into the artifice of eternity. A work by this author describes a small cabin of clay and wattles in the title location and opens, I will arise and go now. One poem by this poet of the Lake Isle of Innisfree describes an aged man as a tattered coat upon a stick who comes to the title Holy City. This author of Leda and the Swan wrote a poem that asserts that an aged man is but a paltry thing and begins, that is no country for old men. For 10 points, name this poet of Sailing to Byzantium and The Second Coming. And that is William Butler Yeats. Toss-up 30. One character in this novel has the habit of playing with his pocket knife and sees an ambulance pass by. 3 characters in this work write a letter about immigration to Canada. Another character in this work repeatedly imagined that his dead friend Evans is there with him. That character goes with his wife Lucrezia to see Dr. Bradshaw, who recommends he be sent home in the country. During a party, the title character of this novel stares out of a window at her neighbor while pondering the suicide of Septimus Smith. For 10 points, name this novel about a day in the life of Clarissa by Virginia Woolf, and that is Mrs. Dalloway. Toss-up number 31. This author wondered in his poem, The Solution, whether it wouldn't be easier for the government to dissolve the people and elect another. This man wrote the lyrics to a song asking, show us the way to the next whiskey bar. That Alabama song is sung by a troupe of prostitutes in a play in which 4 Alaskan lumberjacks, led by Jimmy Mahoney, travel to the title city. The protagonist sings the canon song with the police chief, Tiger Brown, in a play by this author of The Rise and Fall of the City of Mahogany. Pirate Jenny appears in a work by this man that opens with a song about a serial killer whose knife is like the pearly white of a shark's teeth, titled Mac the Knife. For 10 points, name this German author who collaborated with Kurt Weill on the Threepenny Opera and a work set during the 30 Years' War about a washerwoman, Mother Courage, and her children. And that is Bertolt Brecht. Brecht. Toss-up number 32. After an attack of appendicitis in this novel, Amede dies, leaving Angelique Chevalier a widow. 2 other characters in this novel end up shot to death by a jilted husband after beginning an affair under a white mulberry tree. The protagonist is one of the few people to sympathize with a horse doctor who lives in a pit on a riverbank, Crazy Ivar, or her eventual husband, who first appears helping a crying child whose cat is stuck atop a telegraph pole. Marie is murdered by Frank Shabata, and the protagonist marries Carl Lindstrom in, for 10 points, What Novel About Alexandra Bergson and Other Immigrants on the Nebraska Prairie by Willa Cather. And that is O Pioneers. Toss-up number 33. A passage in this poem paraphrases from Julius Caesar and describes between the idea and the reality. It borrows from the Lord's Prayer for the stuttering, for thine is, life is, for thine is thee, and imagines in this poem of shape without form, shade without color. And eyes I dare not meet in dreams comes from the Inferno. Phrases in it like a penny for the old guy and Headpiece filled with straw reference Guy Fawkes Day. This poem heavily references Heart of Darkness, as in the epigraph, Mr. Kurtz, he dead. For 10 points, name this T.S. Eliot poem concluding, "This is the way the world ends, not with a bang, but with a whimper." And that is The Hollow Men. Toss-up 34. This author wrote about a man who boxes against Denny Ward and another character who fails to defeat the man in the red sweater. This author of The Mexican described the Whitechapel district and its East End surroundings in The People of the Abyss. Sailors attempt to mutiny against Wolf Larson in this author's The Sea Wolf, and a man freezes to death in his to build a fire. One of this author's protagonists best spits in a fight, forms a close bond with Thornton, and witnesses the Klondike Gold Rush. That character created by this author of White Fang is Buck, a dog. For 10 points, name this naturalist author of White Fang and The Call of the Wild. And that is Jack London. Toss-up number 35. One character in this novel, Cy Bogart, earns the respect of his fellow townspeople by beating up the son of a local German-American farmer during wartime, though he later causes the teacher, Fern Mullins, to lose his job. Vita Sherman marries Raymond Witherspoon in this novel, and the protagonist's maid, Bea Sorensen, marries Miles Bjornstam. In this novel, a barbarian asserts that it is her duty to preserve books in an argument over getting more people to read at the Jolly 17 Club. The protagonist of this work takes her son Hugh to Washington State and attempts to produce Androcles and the Lion, but members of the Thanatopsis Club instead choose a girl from Kankakee. The protagonist of this work scandalized her husband Will by redecorating his Victorian house, centering on Carol Kennicott's attempts to bring culture to Gopher Prairie. For 10 points, name this novel by Sinclair Lewis. And that is Main Street. Toss-up number 37. At the beginning of a novel by this author, the Reverend Mr. Beebe convinces Charlotte Barnett that it is okay to switch rooms to be closer to the Arno River. A character flees to Germany to hide her pregnancy after having an affair with Leonard Bast in another novel by this author. In addition to describing the love life of Lucy Honeychurch, this author also wrote about Mrs. Wilcox leaving the titular estate to Margaret Schlegel. At the Marabar Caves, Adele is allegedly raped by Dr. Aziz in another work by this author of A Room with a View. For 10 points, name this author of Howard's End and A Passage to India. And that is E.M. Forster. Toss-up 37. A servant in this location shoos away beggars with the excuse that she needs to eat the scraps herself, and fondly remembers a now-deceased man who used to steal glances up her skirt. In this location, a character is infuriated when a photograph of the man she is interested in is stolen from under her pillow by a hunchback. Troubling news arrives to this location about a local girl out of wedlock who is about to be killed for infanticide. The tyrannical matriarch of this location demands that her daughters observe an 8-year mourning period after the death of her husband, which leads to trouble when two of them have their eyes on Pepe el Romano. For 10 points, name this residence that titles a play by Federico Garcia Lorca. And that is The House of Bernarda Alba. Toss-up 38. The protagonist of this novel discusses ancient Indian philosophy with his landlady and dreams of a girl from Berger's poetry named Molly. The preface of this novel is addressed to a character called the Editor, and the protagonist frequent the Black Eagle Bar and used to love Rosa Kreisler. The title character has an affair with Maria, and he skips a show advertised for madmen only. After the fancy dress ball, he encounters a jazz saxophonist who also loves Mozart, Pablo. Pablo has an affair with the title character's lover, prompting him to stab Hermine in the Magic Theater. For 10 points, name this novel about Harry Haller, a work by Hermann Hesse. And that is Steppenwolf. Toss-up 39. In this novel, the hunchback Fanny works as the finisher of the spiraling department, overseen by Mr. Pappleworth in Thomas Jordan's factory. Arthur's mother buys his freedom out of service in the army, but he is still trapped in an unfulfilling marriage to Beatrice Wilde. While recovering from typhoid fever in the hospital, Baxter forgives the protagonist for having an affair with his wife, Clara Dawes, when he sees him visit his sick mother Gertrude, whom he later kills with an overdose of morphine. At Willie Farm, its protagonist falls in love with Miriam Lafers after leaving the coal town Bestwood. For 10 points, name this novel about the artist Paul Morell by D.H. Lawrence. And that is Sons and Lovers. Toss-up number 40. One character in this novel, Charles Tansley, states that women cannot paint or write during a party whose guests include Paul Rayleigh. The first section of this novel describes the visiting poet Augustus Carmichael, and children of this novel's main female character include Camila, Andrew, and James, whose lives are chronicled in its second section, Time Passes. In its third section, Lily Briscoe finishes a portrait before journeying to the title structure. For 10 points, name the Stream of Consciousness novel about the Ramsey family, written by Virginia Woolf. And that is To the Lighthouse. To the Lighthouse. And give me a second. Toss-up number 41. The line, "A cold coming we had of it," opens a poem by this man in which the speaker asks, "Were we led this way for birth or death?" That poem's line, "No longer at ease here in the old dispensation," inspired the title Chinua Achebe novel. Inspired the title of a Chinua Achebe novel. Three white leopards sat under a juniper tree in a poem by this man that begins with a statement, because I do not hope to turn again. This poet of Journey of the Magi wrote, "This is the dead land, this is the cactus land," in a poem that ends by claiming this is the way the world ends, not with a bang, but with a whimper. For 10 points, name this American-born poet who defended his conversion to Anglicanism in Ash Wednesday and wrote The Hollow Men. And that is T.S. Eliot. Toss-up 42. The protagonist of this novel becomes impoverished after McAllister unwisely convinces him to invest in a South African mine during the Boer War. A female character in this novel gives birth to the baby of Emil Miller and cheats on the protagonist with Harry Griffiths before destroying the protagonist's possessions in a fit of rage. Its protagonist studies art with Frederick Lawson in Paris and studies to become the doctor at St. Luke's Hospital, where he meets the father of his future wife, Sally Thorpe Athelney. The second half of this novel describes the protagonist's destructive relationship with the waitress, Mildred Pierce. For 10 points, name this novel about the club-footed Philip Carey, written by William Somerset Maugham. And that is Of Human Bondage. Toss-up 43. A novel by this author ends with a mob coming to evict Neil Kingsblood for his black ancestry. Another novel by this author ends with the title character congratulating his son Ted for eloping with Eunice. Senator Trowbridge opposes Buzz Windrip's fascist regime in a novel by this author titled It Can't Happen Here. A character created by this author eventually gives up his relations with Seneca Doane and has an affair with Tanis Judique before joining the Good Citizens League. This author of Elmer Gantry and Dodsworth set most of his novels in the fictional town of Zenith and wrote about the doctor Martin Arrowsmith, whose wife Leora dies after contracting the plague. In that novel by this author, Paul Riesling is arrested for shooting his wife Zilla. For 10 points, name this author of Babbitt. And that is Sinclair Lewis. Toss-up 44. An old man in this novel says that the hardest things in life to deal with are muddles. This novel's protagonist earns the ire of the Allen sisters after failing to get them Sissy House, a summer home near Windy Corner. In this novel, the pseudonym Joseph Emery Prank is used by Eleanor Lavish, who takes away the protagonist's Baedeker before she enters the Santa Croce. This novel's protagonist breaks off an engagement to the snobbist Cecil Weiss. At the beginning of this novel, the protagonist arrives in the Pension Bertolini in Florence with her cousin Charlotte Bartlett and meets George Emerson while complaining about not being given the title accommodation. For 10 points, name this novel about Lucy Honeychurch by E.M. Forster. That is A Room with a View. Toss-up number 45. Characters in this work include the bad influencers, Thomas Ratner and Willard Sparser. Its protagonist is invited to parties by his future lover to annoy his cousin Gilbert. One character in this work serves as a bellhop in Kansas City, but flees to Chicago after riding in a stolen car which ran over a little girl. The protagonist of this work lives in Lycurgus and becomes involved with Sandra Finchley. That protagonist hits Roberta Alden with a camera and knocks her out of a canoe, leading to her drowning. It is based on the real case of Chester Gillette. For 10 points, name this novel about the life and eventual execution of Clyde Griffiths, a work of Theodore Dreiser. And that would be An American Tragedy. Toss-up 46. This poem asserts that the only school for the soul is studying monuments of its own magnificence, and closes by describing Grecian goldsmiths who keep a drowsy emperor awake, and a form that tells of what is past or passing or to come. The narrator of this poem asks figures in the gold mosaic of a wall to consume my heart away, and those sages standing in God's holy fire must help the poet into the artifice of eternity. Unless soul clap its hands and sing, and louder sing, this poem claims, an aged man is but a paltry thing, a tattered coat upon a stick. The narrator of this poem leaves home because it is no country for old men. For 10 points, name this William Butler Yeats poem about a voyage to a city renamed Constantinople. and that is Sailing to Byzantium. Toss-up 47. Insisting on the centrality of an intellectual freedom, this essay cites at length author Quillier Couch's argument that the poor poet has not in these days, nor has for 200 years, a dog's chance. In an extended metaphor at the beginning of this essay, the narrator lowers her line of thought into the stream and catches a little fish of an idea. In this essay, one of the four Marys from the ballad is cited as the author of the fictional novel Life's Adventure, which includes the sentence, Chloe liked Olivia. This essay maintains that £500 a year and the title luxury are prerequisites for a woman to write fiction. 10 points, name this seminal feminist essay by Virginia Woolf. And that is A Room of One's Own. A Room of One's Own. Toss-up 48. In this play, Peter Lamb owns a tavern in Holland and offers a job to one character who sings the Song of Great Capitulation. The protagonist of this work received her nickname for delivering 50 loaves of bread during the bombardment of Riga. At the beginning of this work, some characters receive black crosses while drawing lots, and one character is executed for stealing a cash box and throwing it into a river. The title figure in this work operates a canteen wagon and loses her 3 children, Elif, Katrin, and Swiss cheese. For 10 points, name this play set during the 30 Years' War and centering on the family of Anna Fearling, the title matriarch, written by Bertolt Brecht. And that is Mother Courage and Her Children. Toss-up number 49. One protagonist of this novel meets the hired hands, Otto Fuchs and Jake Marpole, shortly before the title character's father commits suicide. That protagonist listens to a story about the title character's engagement to Larry Donovan while employed by Wick Cutter, who lives next door to the Harlings. A character in this novel then takes away a suggestion from Lena Lingard to visit the protagonist, who marries Anton Cusack and is the only Shimerda to know any English. For 10 points, name this novel, narrated by Jim Burden and set in Nebraska, written by Willa Cather. And that would be My Antonia. Toss-up number 50. Near the end of this novel, the title character kills the murderous criminal, Jim Hall. In this novel's chapter, The Reign of Hate, the protagonist is severely injured by Cherokee. The title character is terrorized by Lip Lip while living with Gray Beaver before being sold to Beauty Smith, who trains him to become a vicious fighter. Eventually, the title character is adopted by Whedon Scott, who takes him to California. For 10 points, name this Jack London novel about a wolf that becomes a peaceful dog. And that is White Fang. Toss-up number 51. The letters that open this book are paralleled by the emails sent by Jerome that open Zadie Smith's On Beauty, which is essentially a retelling of this novel. The dual origins of one family in this novel are represented by the squabbling between Frida Mosebach and Aunt Julie. Other characters in this novel include the creepy caretaker, Miss Avery, and a woman who adopts the motto, Only Connect. Another character in this novel marries Jackie, who had earlier been seduced and abandoned on Cyprus by Henry, and dies when he is struck with the flat of a saber by Charles. At its end, Helen and Margaret both settle at the title location, which was formerly the property of the Wilcoxes. Leonard Blast and the Schlegel sisters appear in, for 10 points, which E.M. Forster novel titled For an Estate. And that is Howard's End. Toss-up number 52. This poem describes how a woman drew her long black hair out tight and fiddled whisper music on those strings. The title of Doris Lessing's The Grass is Singing comes from an image in this poem. A character in this poem complains, My nerves are bad tonight. 3 lines of this poem consist of only the syllable da, which is then expanded to the words dada, dayahavam, and damyata, or Damayata. This poem's shortest section asks the reader to consider Phlebas and is called Death by Water. Characters in this poem include Tiresias and a famous clairvoyant named Madame Sosostris. Containing the sections The Burial of the Dead and A Game of Chess, this poem, which ends with the words Shantith, 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 begins, April is the cruelest month. For 10 points, name this poem by T.S. Eliot. And that is The Wasteland. The Wasteland. So, keep studying. Best of luck.